The storm had swallowed everything. Snow hurled sideways, thick and blinding, wrapping the Colorado town of Cedar Hollow in a suffocating hush. Streetlights flickered like dying stars, their glow barely cutting through the white curtain that smothered the streets. Wind screamed past boarded windows and creaked old porch swings until they groaned like tired ghosts. Most of the town had gone to sleep early, tucked under electric blankets and battery-powered heaters, praying the grid would hold just a little longer. On the edge of town, down a narrow trail that led into the timberline, something stirred against the storm's pull. A shadow, low to the ground, moving with urgency. The shape broke through the blur broad-shouldered, with a thick black hand-tan coat dusted in ice. His eyes, amber and sharp, flicked left and right, scanning, reading the wind like an old story. A thin white scar ran beneath his right eye, a jagged slash that gave him a permanent look of question. His left ear was clipped, clean, and neater. Silent badge from another life. He had no collar, no name tag, no leash, but he had purpose. His paws sank deep with each step, but he pushed forward, driven not by panic, but by memory. Something had drawn him back, something unfinished. The air was bitter, every breath like glass in his lungs, but he didn't slow. He paused near a bent tree, lifted his head. The wind shifted, his nose twitched. There, gasoline, metal, something warmer, underneath. Human, he barked, sharp and guttural, and took off toward the scent, 3 miles away. Dr. Clara Wynne was finishing her 5th lap around the clinic's exam room, wiping down the already spotless stainless steel table. It had been a long day of nothing. No patients, no calls, just silence and the mechanical hum of the backup generator keeping the building from freezing over. Clara was 34, but storms like this had aged her quicker. She had the wiry frame of someone always moving, even when standing still, and her skin had that hollowed look that came with too many sleepless nights. Her strawberry blonde hair was twisted up in a clip that sagged slightly, as if even it had grown tired. She didn't talk much anymore, not since Jason. Jason Wynne had been Cedar Hollow's pride, a firefighter, the kind that made kids salute, and old men nod in approval. Last winter, he went out on a rescue call during a storm just like this one. He never came back. When the thaw came in spring, they found him curled beside a wrecked snowmobile, still clutching his radio. Clara hadn't been the same since. She stopped going to town meetings, stopped answering friends' texts. Her world had shrunk to the walls of the clinic and the company of her elderly calico cat, Taffy, who now slept curled on the reception counter. That night, Clara had just dimmed the lights, the snow still pounding outside, when she heard it. Scratch, scratch dash scratch dot. At first, she thought it was the wind kicking something against the door. Or maybe a coyote, lost and desperate for warmth. But the sound came again, sharper this time, insistent, precise. She hesitated, pulled on her parka, and grabbed a flashlight. The storm roared the moment she cracked the door open, wind lashing at her face. She squinted into the swirling dark, and froze. A German shepherd stood just beyond the threshold. Chest heaving, fur crusted with ice, eyes locked onto hers with startling focus. He didn't bark immediately, just stared. Then, one short, commanding bark. He turned, took 3 steps away into the snow, paused, looked back. Clara blinked, another bark, louder, this time, urgent, not frightened, not stray, focused. She stepped. Outside, the wind cut into her skin like needles, and the snow rose past her knees as she trudged behind him. He moved ahead, not too fast, always glancing back to make sure she followed. There was something surreal about it being led through a blizzard by a dog with no name, no owner, and no hesitation. After about a quarter mile, her flashlight caught the edge of a sign bent under snowdrift, almost buried. Timberline Road. The dog veered off, toward the woods. Clara hesitated. Her breath came in short bursts. Now her boots were soaked, her fingers stiff, but something in her chest, some old reflex that hadn't died with Jason, pulled her forward. She followed. Then she saw it. The SUV lay tilted on its side against a pine tree half buried in snow. The windshield was cracked through the roof. caved slightly. Steam hissed from the crumpled hood, and one headlight blinked rhythmically, like a dying pulse. Glass sparkled in the snow like frozen stars. The shepherd barked again and jumped up, placing his paws against the side of the vehicle. Clara rushed to the passenger door, boots crunching on broken glass and icy slush. She wiped frost from the rear window and gasped. A man slumped over the steering wheel, blood trailing down his forehead in a frozen red line. His mouth hung slightly open, a fog of breath forming with each exhale. Barely. He wore a navy parka, zipped to the chin, face pale as paper. In the back seat, two small shapes wrapped in mismatched fleece blankets, one pink, one green. Babies. Clara's eyes widened. The girl whimpered, barely a sound. The boy was silent, lips tinged blue. Oh my God. She dropped to her knees, fumbling for her phone, fingers trembling as she dialed. 911. What's your emergency? I need an ambulance. Car rollover near Timberline Ridge. One unconscious adult male. Two infant scald exposure. Critical, please. Hurry. The dispatcher's voice was calm, assuring help was coming. But Clara knew the truth. In this storm, help would take too long. She turned to the shepherd, who now paced nearby, restless, as if he understood. You brought me here, she whispered. Clara reached through the shattered window, found the rear door's lock, and yanked it open. Cold air rushed out like a gasp. She slid her arms under the girl, pulled her close to her chest. The infant let out a faint cry, her tiny body shivering. It's okay, I've got you, Clara murmured, tucking the baby inside her coat. The shepherd pressed his snout to the other child's cheek, letting out a low whine. Clara reached back in. The snow around them continued to fall, thick and relentless. Somewhere in the dark, the sound of crunching footsteps approached. A flashlight beam cut through the haze. Ma'am, step back. She turned. A tall figure emerged, gloved hand raised, badge flashing in the light. Elias Munro. And that's when the rescue truly began. Clara didn't hesitate. As Officer Elias Munro approached, his coat flaring with the wind and his boots crunching on the icy ground, she turned back toward the SUV and reached inside once more. The boy was colder than the girl, his tiny lips a troubling shade of blue, his chest barely rising. She cradled him gently, sliding him into the warmth of her coat beside his sister. Their bodies pressed against hers, fragile and trembling, and for a moment she forgot the cold that gnawed at her fingers and the snow that soaked through her boots. All she could hear was the faint whisper of breath, the proof they were still holding on. I'm Dr. Wynne, she called out. As Elias closed the gap between them, his flashlight catching the glint of shattered glass and steam. I made the call. They're alive, but barely. Elias assessed the scene with quick precision. His military-cut blonde hair already wet from the snow, his breath fogging the air in sharp bursts. He glanced at the man in the front seat, blood streaking down his temple, then to the two infants, Clara now held protectively. His eyes narrowed. We need to move them. My cruiser's parked just up the ridge. Heated blankets in the trunk. Emergency kit too, he said. Together, they worked quickly. Clara handed Elias the girl first, careful not to disturb her fragile body. He wrapped her in a thermal sheet from his pack, then tucked her into the passenger seat of his cruiser. Next came the boy, still silent but clinging to the heat of Clara's body. She whispered reassurances under her breath as she passed him over. He gave a faint caw sound so small it barely registered, but it was enough to make Clara's heart catch. Then came the man. Elias pulled open the driver's side door with a grunt, the frame warped from the crash. Clara helped brace the man's neck as Elias slipped an emergency cervical collar into place. They both struggled to lift his weight, his body limp and heavy, but adrenaline did what strength could not. As they eased him out of the vehicle and onto a blanket, Elias looked at the shepherd, who sat like a sentinel nearby. He hasn't moved since I got here, Elias said. Clara nodded, wiping snow from her eyelashes. He's not just a dog. He led me here, found me at the clinic, made me follow him. Elias glanced at the shepherd again. The dog's coat was matted with snow and ice, but he showed no signs of slowing. His body was tense, eyes tracking every movement. He circled around them once, stopping to nudge the man's boot with his nose, then sat again, still and watchful. Once the man was secured in the back of the cruiser, drip in place and heat packs lining his sides, Elias checked his vitals. The pulse was weak but present. Clara rubbed her gloved hands together, exhaling into her palms. They'll stabilize in the cruiser, but we can't wait long. Storm's thickening again. Ambulance might not make it here in time. Elias looked at her. We'll get them to Holloway Medical ourselves. You ride with the kids. I'll drive. Clara climbed into the back seat, bundling the infants tightly. As the engine roared to life, she turned to glance through the fogged rear window. The shepherd was still there. He hadn't budged. You're coming too, she murmured. The dog didn't need convincing. As soon as Elias opened the back door, the shepherd jumped in and curled up beside the children, positioning himself like a barrier, eyes alert. Clara stared at him, stunned. I don't know who you are, she whispered, but I think you just saved 3 lives. The drive back through the snow was slow and tense. The wind howled louder, and visibility shrank to mere feet. Elias kept both hands tight on the wheel, his jaw clenched, eyes scanning every curve in the road like it might betray them. Clara held the babies close, checking their breathing, whispering to them, humming softly when the girl stirred. The boy remained silent. Beside her, the shepherd shifted, pressed his snout gently to the boy's cheek. Clara watched, holding her breath. The boy blinked, just once. Then again, his lips twitched, and a small sound escaped her, squeaky, broken noise, like a cry unfinished. Clara let out a shaky exhale. Hang in there, sweetheart. We're almost there. When they finally pulled into the emergency bay of Holloway Medical Center, staff were already waiting in, ERA nurse, 2 paramedics, and a trauma doctor, bundled in thick jackets. Elias jumped out first, shouting for a pediatric crash cart. Clara followed, cradling the infants, her coat open despite the wind, her face flushed with cold and determination. The shepherd exited last, bounding out and then stopping just short of the bay doors. He sat, tail flicking, eyes following every move. When a medic stepped toward him, the dog gave a low, measured growl. He's protective, Clara said quickly. Let him stay close. The medic nodded and backed off. Inside, the ER buzzed. With motion, the babies were taken to the neonatal unit, their tiny bodies hooked up to heat lamps and oxygen monitors. Clara stood at the glass watching them, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. Her fingers stung, but her heart burned with something fierce and sharp, a mix of fear and hope, and the sensation that she had just witnessed something impossible. Valor. The name came to her suddenly, unbidden. She didn't know where it had come from, some deep recess of thought, or a whisper from a memory that wasn't hers. She looked at the shepherd through the glass. He was lying down now in the waiting room, chest rising steadily, ears twitching. Valor, she said aloud. He turned his head, looked straight at her, like he already knew. Back in the ER, Elias approached with 2 cups of coffee, both steaming. Clara took one with a nod of thanks, her fingers barely able to grip the cup. They're stable, he said. Warmth, oxygen, IV fluids. Doctor says they'll make it. And the man, still unconscious, they're running scans. No ID. On him, no phone, no wallet, nothing. Clara looked away, eyes unfocused. The baby's twins. Technically, Elias said, but they don't match biologically. They're not related. Clara frowned. But someone went to great lengths to keep them together. They stood in silence, watching the snow fall again beyond the emergency room windows. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. Like the air before a storm starts again. Elias broke the silence. That dog. He didn't just stumble into town. He remembered something. Led you back there. Clara nodded slowly. He remembered when no one else could. In the corner, Valor finally lay his head down. But even in sleep, his body remained. Alert, ears half lifted, as if the mission wasn't done yet. Not until the danger was gone. Not until the story was told. And Clara, staring at him, knew this wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. The hospital halls were hushed, dim with low-watt lighting that made everything feel suspended in a kind of tense, watchful silence. Holloway Medical was small but efficient, the kind of place where the nurses knew your name, your dog's name, and the way you took your coffee unless you were a mystery man dragged in from a snowstorm with 2 half-frozen infants and a head wound that refused to offer up a name. He lay in room 203, monitors beeping softly beside him, a neck brace still secured, an IV running fluids into his arm. The attending nurse, May Turner, had been checking his vitals every hour. Her hands firm but gentle, her eyes trained to spot the signs most others would miss. She'd seen trauma before, more than she cared to remember, but something about this man unsettled her. He hadn't stirred once. Until just after 6, the storm had lessened outside, replaced by a heavy, silver, quiet. May was jotting notes when she heard a hitch in his breathing. His fingers twitched. Then, slowly, his eyes opened, pale blue, cracked with veins, glassy from medication, but not vacant. He blinked once, twice, then turned his head fractionally, wincing. "You're in Holloway Medical," May said softly, moving toward the bed. "You were in an accident. Just nod if you understand." He nodded. Quotes, "Do you know your name?" His lips moved, but nothing came. He tried again, jaw tightening, frustration flickering across his face. "Don't force it," May said gently. "Sometimes, the brain just needs a minute to catch up." There was no panic in his face, only confusion. He looked toward the window. Snow clung to the edges of the glass, muting the outside world. He closed his eyes for a beat, then opened them again, sharper this time. Alert. A few minutes later, the door creaked open, and in stepped Dr. James Renly. Tall, early 50s, with a salt and pepper beard and tired eyes. Renly had a reputation for talking to himself when reviewing charts. Today was no different. "Vitals look decent," he muttered, flipping through the chart. "Pupil response is symmetrical. 4's holding. Possible retrograde amnesia, ... or selective memory loss. Or just plain stubbornness." May raised an eyebrow. "He woke up protecting babies, Jim. Doesn't strike me as the type to fake anything." Renly gave a non-committal grunt, made a quick note, and left without another word. The room was quiet again until the knock came. This one, softer, more polite. In stepped Ramona Beck, military parka, still zipped halfway up. Auburn hair tucked beneath a knit cap, clipboard in hand. Her presence filled the space, not with noise but with certainty. She moved like someone used to walking into chaotic situations and restoring order one step at a time. "I'm with Child Services," she said, offering a small smile. "Name's Ramona Beck. I'm not law enforcement. I'm just here because the children you were with, they need someone to speak for them until we know more." He didn't respond, but his eyes locked on her, clear and direct. She stepped closer, held up a laminated photo to infants swaddled in warm hospital blankets, side by side in a heated cot. "They're safe," she said, watching his expression carefully. "You got them out in time. Do you want to tell me their names?" He stared at the picture, a beat past "I don't know," he rasped. His voice was hoarse, barely audible, but you knew they mattered. Ramona said. He nodded slowly. Back at the veterinary clinic, the German Shepherd, now known as Valapace, near the front door. The storm had passed, but the tension had not. Clara sat cross-legged on the floor near him, brushing through his coat with steady, practiced hands. She'd cleaned his wounds the night before, uncovering scars that told a story she didn't yet know. Burns along the flank, bruising near the ribs, small cuts between the pads of his paws. "You weren't just wandering," she said quietly, brushing a hand gently down his back. "You were running." Vala made a sound low in his throat, something between a grunt and a sigh. Then he moved to the back window, ears pricked. Across the street, Elias Monroe stepped out of his cruiser carrying a small box under one arm. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he approached the door. Clara opened it before he could knock. "Morning," he said. "You look like hell," she replied. "I brought thermal blankets and this." He held out the box. Inside was a burned, partially melted harness K9 regulation. The buckle singed and warped. "I found it under the passenger seat," Elias said. "SUV must have been his. No tags, no chip, but this. I'd bet it belonged to him." Clara took the harness gently. Vala stepped forward, sniffed it once, then sat. "Silent still, definitely trained," Elias said. "Military or law enforcement?" Clara nodded, but no record. Elias shook his head. "I asked Ramona to run his paw print, see if he matched any service registry. Nothing came back." "That doesn't mean he wasn't part of something," Clara said. "No, just means it wasn't public." They stood in silence for a moment, staring at the dog who was now watching both of them like he was reading their thoughts. "Ramona told me something else," Elias said. "The babies, they're not related. Fraternal twins, but from different DNA lines. Adoption files sealed. No birth records, no maternal history." "Meaning?" Clara asked. "Meaning someone went to great lengths to erase them from existence." Stomach twisted. "And the man? No ID, no prints. Facial recognition turned up nothing. He knows how to vanish, Clara, which means he was running." She looked down at Vala. "Then this town," she said softly, "this isn't the end of the story." Elias met her gaze. "No," he said. "Maybe it's the beginning." At the police station, a small conference room had been cleared for Ramona. She sat at the table, fingers laced over a slim red folder. Across from her, Elias leaned back, in his chair, jaw tight, his badge clipped visibly to his belt. He looked like a man trying hard not to fall into old habits. "There's a pattern," Ramona began. "I've seen it once before. Years ago." She opened the folder and slid out 3 photographs. The first was of a woman with dark skin, mid-30s, black curls pulled into a bun, cradling a newborn in a hospital hallway. The second, grainier, showed the same woman stepping into a van outside a courthouse. The third, just ashes and twisted metal. Her name was Dr. Simone Harland, pediatric geneticist, whistleblower, presumed dead 14 months ago. She'd accused a medical firm, Crestline Biogenetics, of using abandoned infants in unregistered clinical trials. 2 weeks later, her van exploded. Ramona looked up. "She vanished," she said, "but not before she left something behind. Or someone." Ilya stared at the photo. "You think she gave the babies to him?" "I think she gave them to someone she trusted," Ramona said. "And I think he's been running ever since." The puzzle pieces were shifting, but the image wasn't clear yet. Not even close. The first sign something was wrong came with the phone call Clara was wiping down. Vala's paw pads again when her cell phone buzzed. The number was blocked, private. She hesitated, then answered with the same instinct that had made her follow Vala into the storm. "Dr. Wynne," she said. A man's voice, low and calm, slid through the receiver like a blade. "You're sheltering him, aren't you?" Clara stiffened. "Who is this?" "He doesn't belong to you," the voice continued. "He doesn't belong to anyone anymore. Who are you?" she repeated, voice sharp now. There was a brief pause. "Tell the dog goodbye." The line went dead. Clara's breath caught. Vala was already on his feet, ears pointed, muscles coiled. He'd heard the voice, or sensed something beneath it. Something cold. Outside the clinic, across the road. A white SUV idled for a breathless moment, then pulled away into the snow. Clara stepped to the glass, watched it disappear behind swirling flakes, then slowly backed up and locked the front door. Every curtain, every blind, was pulled tight. She flipped the deadbolt on the side entrance and checked the rear latch. Her hands moved quickly, but her thoughts were spinning. They knew. They had his name. They knew she had him, and they were coming. That evening, Elias arrived with 2 bags of groceries, a half-dozen fuel canisters, and a grim look that said he'd already heard the same storm on his end. Clara told him everything. The call, the voice, the threat. He didn't interrupt once, just listened, face drawn tight with worry. "Did they use your name?" he asked, after a long silence. Clara nodded. "They knew I had him." "Then you're in it now too." Later, they sat in the back room, Vala resting between them. Elias sipped at a mug of instant coffee while Clara ran her fingers through the thick fur at the shepherd's neck. The room was quiet except for the wind tapping at the window pane. For a moment, Clara let herself sink into the stillness, until Vala rose. It was sudden. No sound had triggered him. No scent she could detect, but he was up, head high, tail low, pacing. His body moved like a soldier returning to a battlefield. He circled once, twice, then stopped near the front door. Pressing his snout against the bottom corner, he growled. A deep, rumbling sound, low in his chest, not fearful. Focused, Clara moved to the light switch. Nothing. The power had gone. She checked her phone. Dead, no bars, no WI-V. Then came the knock. 3 slow taps. Deliberate, measured, like someone wasn't just asking for entrance, but announcing themselves. "I don't know who you are," Clara said, toward the door, voice steady, despite the quake in her hands, "but I'm calling the police." Silence, then a voice, smooth and smirking, muffled through the wood. Male, slightly southern, "We're not here for you, Miss Wynne. Just the dog, give him up, and no one gets hurt." Clara didn't reply. Vala barked, sharp and defiant. The power died completely. Emergency lights failed. The clinic dropped into darkness. She reached for her flashlight, thumbed it on, and aimed the beam toward the hallway, just as she heard the first creak of movement at the side entrance. Someone was testing the lock, jiggling it, then pushing. Harder. Glass shattered at the front of the building. They were inside. Clara spun around and ran for the back kennel room. She slammed the door shut, locked the bolt, and yanked a filing cabinet in front of it. Her breath came fast now, fogging. In the air, she turned to Vala, who stood beside her, tense and unmoving. "Go," she whispered. He blinked. "Go find Elias. Now." Still, he didn't move. "I mean it, boy. You need to get help. I'll be fine. Go." For a moment, she thought he wouldn't leave. Then, with a grunt, he sprinted toward the side window, small, barely cracked open for ventilation. Clara shoved it wider. Vala leaped, his powerful body twisting through the narrow frame. A spray of glass followed as he hit the snow outside, running. She turned back to the door. Voices were louder now, closer. "She's got guts. I'll give her that. She doesn't know anything. We just need the dog, and the man." Clara pressed her back to the metal cabinet, a scalpel gripped tight in her hand. Her heart pounded, like a drumbeat behind her ribs. But her mind was sharp now, clear. She wasn't going to let this end the way it did with Jason. She wasn't going to let anyone else die on her watch. Not Vala, not Elias, and not those children. From the front of the building, there was a loud crash, wood splintering. They were coming. Then, gunfire. One shot. Then another dot. Then a bar cloud, thunderous, echoing through the walls like a warning shot from heaven itself. "Clara, it's Elias." His voice, alive, urgent. She kicked the door open and stumbled into the hallway. The flashlight beam caught the outline of Elias, crouched behind the shattered reception desk, gun raised. Two men in black lay on the floor, one unconscious, one writhing in pain. A third had fled through the rear, footprints already fading in the snow. Vala stood beside one of the downed intruders, chest heaving, jaws red. Clara dropped to her knees, pulled him close. "Good boy," she whispered. "You're okay, you're okay." Elias moved toward her. "We need to go now." Clara nodded, still shaking. "They'll come back," he said. They gathered what they could: medical kits, formula blankets, whatever supplies fit in the trunk of Elias's cruiser. Vala didn't leave Clara's side. He limped slightly now, but there was no hesitation in his movements. He was still ready, still guarding. "What about the man?" Clara asked, as she climbed into the passenger seat. "He comes too," Elias replied. They drove in silence through Cedar Hollow's dark streets, the snow muting the world outside. Vala lay curled in the back seat, breath steady, ears twitching at every sound. The twins slept in a nest of blankets beside him, unaware that danger had only just passed them by. Halfway through town, Elias made a turn without signaling. Clara looked at him. Where are we going? Someplace they won't think to check. A mile past the last house in Cedar Hollow stood an old ranger's cabin. Abandoned for years, once used during wildfire seasons, it had a working fireplace, solar power, and no direct road access. They reached it just before dawn. Inside, Elias double-checked every lock. Clara laid the twins on thick folded blankets near the hearth. Vala sniffed every room before curling beside the children, his eyes closing only when he was sure everyone was accounted for. Clara stood in the doorway and stared at the fire. Her hands were still trembling. Behind her, Elias's phone buzzed. Was Ramona. Her voice shook. "They're onto us," she said. They traced the baby's biometric scans to a shell company, Crestline Biog. Clara turned, her eyes wide. "That's who Simone Harland was investigating," Elias said quietly. "And they've got help," Ramona added. "Inside law enforcement. I can't guarantee your safety." Clara swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Ramona didn't hesitate. "You hide, you protect those kids, and make sure Vala stays alive." The line went dead. The cabin at Black Ridge Hollow creaked beneath the weight of the snow piling up on its roof. Its weathered timbers groaned like old bones, but the fire inside blazed steady, crackling against the draft that slipped through chinks in the walls. The space smelled of pine sap, wool, and something older like history, or maybe refuge. For now, it was safety. For now, it was enough. Clara poured boiling water into 2 tin mugs and handed one to Elias, who sat at the window with a rifle propped beside him. He hadn't slept in almost 30 hours, but his eyes remained sharp. Outside, the forest lay still beneath a thick blanket of white, but no one trusted that stillness anymore. Vala lay curled at the base of the wood stove, ears twitching but body finally relaxed. The twins were asleep nearby, bundled in layers of blankets that Clara had checked twice already. They breathed evenly, tiny chests rising in rhythm, cheeks flushed with the warmth of the fire. Across the room, the man they called Caleb stirred. He had barely spoken since arriving. His movements were slow, careful, as though each one summoned a shard of memory he wasn't ready to face. But whenever the babies made a sound, even just a whimper, he responded instantly, moving to soothe them with an instinct that seemed deeper than thought. Now, his voice came low. "I remember her." Clara looked up from the fire. "Who?" "Simone." "Elias." "Turned, you're sure?" Caleb nodded slowly. "She was the last person I saw before the fire. She handed me the twins. Said something strange." "What did she say?" Clara asked gently. Caleb rubbed his temples. "She said, 'Take them where the dog remembers.' I didn't know what she meant, but Valahi just started running. Like he understood, and I followed." He paused, his expression tightening. "I didn't even know I was being chased. Until it was too late." Elias moved to sit beside him. "Do you know who you are?" There was a silence. Then Caleb exhaled. "Caleb Ree. I worked as a security consultant, private contractor. We did off the books, operations, transport, extraction, protection. I didn't ask too many questions, until I did." Clara sat forward. Crestline. Caleb nodded. "They were contracting out gestational trials. Controlled surrogate pregnancies. Babies born in facilities. No birth records, no medical files. The company had biometric patents, wanted to design specific genetic markers. Targeted immunity, cognitive performance, things that sound like science fiction, but they were real. And these kids." He glanced toward the twins, then swallowed. "They weren't the first, but they were the last ones Simone could get out." "Jesus," Elias muttered. Simone had been collecting evidence. Lab files, images, tracking data. She knew they were going to kill her. So she gave me everything and said, "Run." She didn't trust anyone else, not even law enforcement, and Vala. Clara asked. Caleb turned to look at the dog now resting beside the fire. He belonged to the program, trained in surveillance, retrieval, and tracking, but Simone bonded with him. Said he remembered what mattered. When the building went up, I thought I'd lost him, but he found me 3 days later, bandaged, limping, like he'd pulled himself out of the fire. He's been with me ever since. They all sat in silence then, the only sound, the crackle of wood and the soft breathing of children. Then phone buzzed. A message from Ramona. He read it silently, then looked up. The files Simone collected. She set them to auto-upload to a secure drop point if she went dark. Ramona intercepted it last night and leaked everything. Digital copies, video recordings, patient logs. Every news agency west of the Mississippi has the story now. Crestline is under federal investigation. Clara blinked. It's over. No, Elias said, but it's exposed. They'll still try to clean up, eliminate links, bury the rest, but they won't do it loud anymore. A knock at the door froze them all. Caleb reached for a pistol. Elias grabbed his rifle, but Vala didn't move to attack. His ears were up, but his posture relaxed. Clara walked cautiously to the door and opened it. Ramona Beck stepped inside, wrapped in a ranger parka, cheeks red from the cold. 2 agents in civilian winter coats stood behind her but remained outside, watching the woods. You're safe, she said. For now. Elias stood, jaw tight. They'll come again. Ramona nodded. Yes, but they'll be quieter. Crestline is bleeding from too many places at once. Most of their executive board is already in custody or in hiding. Their operatives will be running scared. Caleb looked up, and the children. Ramona stepped closer, her eyes softening. If you're willing, you can file for guardianship. You're not their biological father, but you protected them. Risked everything. He didn't speak for a moment. Then his voice cracked. I want to raise them. Ramona smiled faintly. Then let's make it legal. 2 weeks passed. Cedar Hollow thawed. The storm that had gripped the town broke at last, and with it, the old silence that had lingered over Clara's world like a shadow. The town square held a vigil lit by candlelight. The clinic reopened now with a new hand-painted sign beneath Clara's name, Emergency Animal Rescue. Partnered with Cedar Hollow law enforcement and Valor, he'd become a legend. They installed a bronze plaque just outside the building. Embedded in stone, it read, to the one who remembered, who ran through fire, through frost, and never looked back. Every Thursday, Clara, Caleb, and the twins walked down to the square. Jonah and Lily, names chosen with care, toddled ahead, wrapped in tiny coats. Laughter bright against the SNOWMELT. Caleb walked slower now, still favoring his right leg, but his shoulders had straightened. His eyes were clearer. He wore a small silver pendant around his neck, etched with a single word. Simone. Clara had changed to her grief still lived inside her, but it no longer ruled her. The quiet between words had softened. In Vala's presence, she'd found something Jason had once given her, a steady, unwavering kind of love that didn't need to be explained. Then came the ceremony. The first Saturday of spring, the whole town gathered. Ramona stood beside the mayor in a navy coat as they pinned a silver medal to Vala's new harness. The dog blinked in the morning sun, but didn't flinch. He sat proudly beside Caleb, tail thumping once as the crowd applauded. Elias took the stage last. He wore a new uniform, freshly pressed, but his voice remained calm. We talk a lot about service, about remembering who we are in the worst of storms. But Vala didn't need a badge to remind him. He remembered when no one else could. And because of that, we are here, all of us. No one spoke for a long time after. That night, the cabin at Black Ridge Hollow glowed with firelight once more. Clara and Caleb sat on the porch, mugs of tea in their hands, listening to the sounds of spring pressing against the edge of the forest. Inside, the twins slept, nightlights casting soft stars across the walls. Vala lay at their feet, one paw twitching in sleep. You think he'll ever forget? Caleb asked. Clara shook her head, smiling. No, she said. He remembers everything. Caleb reached down and ran a hand through the shepherd's thick fur. So do I. Above them, the wind moved through the trees not with menace this time, but like a lullaby sung by the forest itself. Something sacred, something enduring, something that had survived. The sky above Cedar Hollow was a bruised shade of purple when the first signs of trouble returned. It had been 3 weeks since the storm broke, and though the snowbanks still lined the sides of the road like ancient walls, spring had begun to whisper beneath it. All meltwater trickled through gutters, and the wind carried more warmth than warning. But peace, they were learning, was fragile. It began with a call, not to Clara or Elias, but to the medical center. Nurse May Turner was charting the twins' progress now, officially named Jonah and Lily, when she noticed a note slipped under the ER door. Plain envelope, no postage. Inside, a photograph, a surveillance still, Caleb, leaving the clinic. Lily in his arms, the back of the photo bore a message. You're not finished. Elias was notified immediately. He drove straight to the clinic, wind biting despite the sunshine. Clara met him at the door, Vala already pacing behind her. They're watching, she said, no preamble. Elias nodded grimly. They're trying to make us flinch. Do we? No, but we don't wait either. That night, the cabin was fortified again, locks reinforced, escape routes planned. Vala patrolled more frequently, his steps quieter but more deliberate. At times he'd sit at the window for hours, unmoving, ears alert, gaze fixed on something far off, as if waiting for a sound only he could hear. Caleb didn't sleep much after that. He spent long hours standing near the fireplace, eyes lost in the flames. Sometimes he whispered to them, words Clara couldn't hear, memories maybe, or regrets. Other times he sat with the twins, gently reading from battered books, his voice low and steady, like he was anchoring himself to the moment. Through the simple act of speaking aloud, Ramona came twice in that final week. The first time, she brought new paperwork, guardianship approvals, ID reinstatement requests, sealed court orders. Caleb signed everything with a hand that shook only slightly. You're almost untouchable now, Ramona said. But almost still leaves a crack. What do you suggest? Elias asked. Ramona hesitated, then said, disappear again. Not like before legally, new names, new state. Quiet life. No, Clara said, before anyone else could. They don't get to erase us again. Ramona gave her a look that said she respected the courage, but didn't trust the odds. The second visit was different. She brought news. The final Crestline servers were seized yesterday, she said, dropping a thick folder on the table. Turns out, Simone had a backdoor key all along. She uploaded biometric databases, financial ledgers, employee records. They were buying more than research. They were buying people. Caleb didn't say anything. He just stood up and walked outside. Clara followed. She found him standing near the edge of the clearing, the wind tugging at his coat, eyes staring into the trees. I should have stopped it sooner, he said. You ran, Clara replied. You saved them. They weren't the only ones. No, but they're the ones who made it. He didn't speak for a while. Just listened to the wind and the faint sound of Vala's low bark echoing from the cabin. When Simone gave me those babies, he said finally, she looked me in the eye and said, hell no, where to go? She meant Vala. She trusted him more than any of us. She was right, Clara said. That evening, just after sundown, a car approached the cabin. Not fast, not threatening, just steady. Elias stepped out to meet it, hand resting on his hip. Out came a man in a government issue coat. No badge, number, weapons visible, just a tablet in hand and calm in his posture. I'm here to close the case, he said. He explained that federal investigations had concluded that the Department of Justice was preparing indictments against multiple former executives, that Crestline, as it once existed, no longer did. It would be dismantled, buried in litigation and scandal for years. Then he turned to Caleb. You're free to go where you want, but for your protection, we can offer relocation. No, Caleb said firmly. We're staying. The agent nodded once, understood. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, that dog. There's no service record, no number, no microchip. As far as the system is concerned, he doesn't exist. Clara stepped forward. That's because he never needed the system. The agent gave a faint smile. Fair enough. They left the next morning. Not the family, just the watchers. For the first time in weeks, the cabin felt like home again, not a bunker. That weekend, Cedar Hollow gathered once more. This time, not for danger or mourning, but celebration. At the town square. Beneath newly blooming trees, the mayor awarded Clara and Caleb the Community Valor Award. A small plaque was placed beside the fountain bearing Jonah and Lily's names, and beneath it, a single line, found in the storm, raised in the light. Valor sat beside the stage, tail gently thudding the ground. He didn't bark. He didn't need to. Later, Clara and Caleb walked the children down to the creek at the edge of town. Lily chased leaves. Jonah picked up pebbles and showed them to Valor like treasures. Caleb watched them, hands in his coat pockets, eyes soft, with something close to peace. They're growing fast, Clara said. They're safe. Because of you. Because of him, Caleb corrected, nodding toward the shepherd, now lying by the water's edge. Watching over the twins, like always. That night, back at the cabin, the family sat by the fire. The twins slept in their small, shared bed, curled together like they always had, as if remembering their time in the cold and promising to never be apart again. Caleb placed a new photo above the fireplace, one of Simone, taken from Ramona's files. She stood in front of a clinic, arms folded, expression fierce, hopeful. It belonged there. With the rest of them. Clara poured hot tea, sat beside him on the couch, and leaned her head against his shoulder. Outside, the wind hummed low through the trees, but it no longer sounded like danger. It sounded like memory. Valor lay near the door, one eye cracked open, ears flicking at small nighttime noises, but his body stayed still. He was at ease. He was home. You think he dreams, Caleb? Asked. Clara smiled. I think he remembers. I wonder if he ever regrets coming back. She shook her head. Not for a second. He knew what mattered. And somewhere in the dark, deep in the woods beyond Cedar Hollow, snow melted quietly into soil. Spring returned to the land that had once been frozen in fear. And in that thawing silence, the world exhaled. Sometimes, miracles don't come with thunder. They come quietly, on four legs, with a scar over one eye and a promise buried in the heart. And they never forget.